Good evening and welcome to Inside the Rookery, where we are welcoming back a previous guest who's been on a few times now, both by yourself and with your partner. So welcome to Jenda Gammon. Today it is thriller night because it's Halloween week, and so we are talking to Jendia about her new novel, which is a thriller. Jendia, welcome back to the stream.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here and a lot of fun stuff to talk about.
Excellent. Would you like to, before we jump into the questions, and as always, we've got lots of questions from our Discord server and from our patrons, would you like to introduce yourself and introduce the new novel to us?
Yes. Hi, I'm Jenda Gammon, and I'm an author of science fiction, fantasy, horror, and now thrillers, as well as I'm a science writer and I'm an artist. I grew up in East Tennessee and Southern Appalachia, and now I live in Los Angeles. My husband is Gareth L. Powell, as some of you know. And I am delighted that the book Atacama, which is coming out May 13th from Slay House Publishing, is my first thriller, but it has horror and sci-fi elements in it. I also have another book coming out shortly before that called Doomflower, but it's not up for pre-orders yet. That actually has some thriller elements as well, even though it's a campy horror. So I'm kind of diving into that, digging in to these, sort of high concept books that kind of take you somewhere and don't let up till the end.
And 2024 has been a busy year for you and Gareth, not least because you've established Stars and Sabers, your publishing imprint, and you've been working really hard on the upcoming anthologies for that.
Right. We have a cross-genre anthology called Of Shadows, Stars, and Sabers that is coming out in February 2025 with 29 authors and many of them award-winning. We've got an Emmy winner, we've got Hugo, Bram Stoker winners, but we also have some debut authors and their stories are just as incredible. So it's a true gift. This book is wonderful and it has been crowdfunded. And so the supporters will get their books first, sometime in the new year, and general pre-orders will go on hopefully later this month. And that's the first of several anthologies that we have planned. We also have some standalone author works coming in the new year from Pedro Iniguez and Eugene Bacon, Ren Hutchings, and P.A. Cornell. So the slate is wonderful. So go to starsandsabers.com/books. You can see everything that's coming and can't wait. This is just the beginning, right? We're going to have a lot of different things and they will be for adults, young adults, middle grade. We will have, novels, collections, novellas, novelettes, and we hope eventually graphic novels and maybe some poetry and nonfiction as well. So.
And I don't think I asked you last time, but I noticed that it's Stars and Sabers, and the Sabers is the American spelling, presumably because it's partially a play on Stars and Stripes, and Stars science fiction, Sabers fantasy. But does Sabers have a personal connection for you? Is there like a cavalry officer in your history?
No, it just is, there's, how do I say this without invoking, certain large entertainment companies? There was a certain inspirational kind of thing that has that word in it. So I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, let's say no more.
So that's part of it. But, Sabers definitely, we think of saber-toothed tigers. We think of the actual sabers, and then fantasy obviously coming into play because it is Stars and Sabers. Automatically you think science fiction, fantasy, and even though we also will have horror and thriller mystery books as well. And who knows, like we are tinkering with the idea of having another imprint off of my production company, which this is one, and that company is Roaring Spring Productions LLC. I'm the CEO. So we do have potential plans for other imprints possibly in the future for different genres entirely. But for now, we will stick with speculative fiction and keep it under this, for the present, and immediate couple of years in the future, see how things go.
And I know that you're really closely connected to where you grew up in Appalachia. And I know recently, the hurricane passed through and did a lot of damage there. And it's been quite upsetting, I think, to see the way that part of America is characterized sometimes. And I know you've been really active on social media. I've seen everything you've shared to raise awareness for the people of that area and help them fundraise to rebuild their homes and their lives, really. So I just wanted to say I was so like, not proud of you. I don't have the right to be proud of you, I don't think, but certainly proud to know you when I saw you doing that. I think it's really important.
Yeah, and it's the least I can do because I grew up in East Tennessee and Southern Appalachia, and I have hiked and fished and driven all through those mountains in Western North Carolina and East Tennessee and Southwest Virginia, all of which were devastated. I have tried to raise awareness through both direct fundraising to help people get food and supplies. I have funded friends of mine who are in the area, since I can't be there, to actually give them money to go and help. I have donated a short story to an anthology, which is coming out this month, called To Appalachia with Love, a sci-fi anthology. There were several genres, and mine was sci-fi. And you can directly support that online. And the money goes directly to, World Central Kitchen, to Beloved Asheville, to all these different causes. And you get an anthology out of the deal. I also have donated some of my own signed copies of my books to help raise money. Just shipped those this past week to the winning person for that. And, it's ongoing, and it's going to take years, and some of it is never going to be the same. But, I think we need to jump in and support these people. It was completely catastrophic. And it just, I've been incredibly upset, at times very blue over it all, just to see that happen and know that friend of mine almost drowned in her apartment. One of my cousins was in Marshall, North Carolina, and without power or water for several days. I've got friends who are in Asheville who, they finally got their power, but they can't drink out of the sink. They don't have potable water still. It's you just see like entire parts of an interstate, like one of the big motorways in the UK, completely clawed out, a major thoroughfare for freight and other things. This is devastating. And people up in the hollers, which are like, the little tiny nooks and crannies of the highlands of Southern Appalachia, just homes just swept away in flash floods, just gone. And sadly, several people have died. The recovery effort has been brutal on everyone, and it's ongoing. So any awareness we can raise to help folks in Western North Carolina and East Tennessee, I'm going to be part of that. And I'd love to go back and just actually be boots on the ground and help, but currently I can't. So.
Well, we will share the link to the anthology and some of the other links that you mentioned. So if anyone's passing by this on just now live, or on the video on demand on YouTube afterwards, then please do check out that anthology and do what you can to help. So let's talk about your new novel. I got a sneak peek of this. I'm super excited about it. I think it's, from what I've read so far, I think it's brilliant. So can you tell us about it, and who are the main characters? What's it about?
So Atacama came about as an offshoot of a short story in the Shadow Galaxy, my collection, which is under my Dotson pen name, before I switched over, decided to move forward with Jenda Gammon. So in that collection, there was a short story called The Scaffold, and it involved a laboratory incident that went out of control. And, it's definitely going from there. I knew that there was a lot more to this story. I knew that there was more beyond the very ending, which is, we better run, and that's how it just bluntly ends. So I expanded on that and made this sort of high concept thriller. The main character is Fiona Hawthorne, and she is a laboratory researcher at a university in East Tennessee. And she and her professor, Dr. Bingham, have been working together for a couple of years. And something starts to happen. A friend of hers was in the Atacama Desert on a research expedition. Dr. Bingham announces that they've all died, the entire expedition, and she's in shock. And so she's coping with that immediate, like, trying to react to grief as certain things are starting to spin out of control for her. And it happens that there is a shadowy organization which could be implicated either in their death or something. And they've also got their claws into the funding of her professor's research. And there's a mysterious figure named Jack Cordero who pops up and was one of the scientists in that building. She didn't know him, but he seems to be connected to all of this. And so she and her friend Leif Lambert, who's a bit of kind of an overreactive, Fox Mulder type, is, all in on conspiracies and, secret government ops and stuff like that. And he's like constantly caffeinated kind of guy, right? So he really thinks that there's something going on. They both start to dig deeper. And the further they dig, the worse things get. She's experiencing things also in her personal life as her, her engagement unravels. And, she's just facing everything falling apart. Her best friend is dead. Her potential marriage is dying, and she's having to deal with this weird corporation that wants to shut things down. But she's also personally at great risk from incredible danger from something monstrous.
And I didn't know where the Atacama Desert. Someone had asked me where the Atacama Desert was. I don't think I could have pointed it on a map before I read this. Why did you pick that part of the world? Was there?
Well, I'm a lifelong astronomy and astrophysics fan. I toyed with at one point going into that myself. And one of the things that's unique about the Atacama Desert is its lack of rainfall. It is a very stark landscape in parts. In those parts, NASA has been using it as a training field for Mars. And, exoplanet exploration potential. Because of its incredibly harsh environment, it also makes a really good study for potential exobiology on other worlds, things that can survive in extreme environments and things like that. So knowing all of this, I'm also a science writer. So I'd already, kind of dug into some research on this. I was like, what if something else was going on down there? And so reading into the history of the Atacama Desert, it has a very strange history and a very fraught one. There's a lot of copper mining there and quite devastated the area. There were boom towns that went bust. A lot of people were killed, and it just is, a lot has happened there. So it's very interesting on multiple levels. And I dug into that. And the more I dug, the more I was like, my God, there's really strange stuff happening here. It's a really weird environment. It's beautiful in a stark way, in a harsh way, but there's also this history. And then there's also some really strange fossils that have been found. I was like, oh God, I'm all in. And so thinking along those lines, I also really wanted the juxtaposition of the incredibly fertile Tennessee Valley, East Tennessee, lush, almost subtropical, stark, contrast to the Atacama Desert, and so you have, in a lot of ways, Fiona is split between multiple worlds. And so that on the book cover itself, I wanted Appalachia to be on the top upside down and the Atacama Desert on the bottom. And that represents her world being turned upside down. So the cover is beautifully done by Chris Panettiere, and he is also an author. So we had a really good time. I sent him concept sketches and we worked on that. And we wanted to dig into the fact that, there's people in this, but there's something unsettling and otherworldly going on, and I really loved things like The Thing, John Carpenter's The Thing, and The X-Files, Black Mirror, in which, you're kind of, Twilight Zone kind of stuff, where you're stuck in these situations that completely derail you. And those are the things I dug into. So I wanted the stark, very interesting Atacama Desert juxtaposed against, East Tennessee, Southern Appalachia, and the two different kinds of research. I also approached researchers in the desert, and I almost flew down. I was invited down with the NASA team. I couldn't go. I would have loved to have gone, but I talked to one of the people who was working on, Jet Propulsion Labs, JPL's team down there. I also approached an ecologist in Chile at a university and asked him about the ecology of the Atacama Desert. What's there? What are the interactions, And so that was kind of combining a lot of different threads for me: my science writing, my love of astronomy, astrophysics, ecology, which is my degree, sci-fi and horror, and this thriller of this is a real world place. And, you're sort of slowly ratcheting up, unfolding this mystery of what happened to the team down there? What happened to her best friend? And she wants answers. She needs answers as she's doing this immediate grieving to move on with her life,
So I've decided that we're going to ask this question, but as we're talking about ecology and habitats, this is going to become a standard Inside the Rookery question. What's your favorite corvid?
Oh, hang on.
Crow, Jay, blue or otherwise, Raven, Nutcracker, Treepie, or Chuff?
Raven.
Raven, yeah.
And I have a lot of them here in Southern California. In LA, there are a lot of ravens. And in fact, in my immediate neighborhood, we have crows and ravens. And we do have Stellar's jays and Western scrub jays. So, but the raven is my most favorite. And I hear them croaking and, making all signs of interesting sounds. So they actually feature in some of my books, ravens too.
So Martine has asked, what do you think are the components of a gripping thriller?
Well, for me, as a reader, the thrillers that I enjoyed, really ranged from both the speculative to stuff like John le Carre, Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, like the spy movie stuff. But I always loved in a thriller the feeling of being unmoored from the current track that you're on, and there being a conspiracy or something deeper that you fall down into, or you're pulled down into, either one. And to me, that makes a great thriller because you're disoriented, and you're like, well, what's going to happen next? And how do you get out of this? So that's one of my favorite parts of a gripping thriller. It's just that disorientation, being pulled into something bigger or more sinister than you imagined or that you knew about before.
Mm-hmm. And Martin had followed that up with, and do you see thriller as a component of a novel or story's definition rather than a genre of its own? And I think she's thinking like action thriller, spy thriller, psychological thriller.
Oh, it definitely can be both. I mean, it definitely, there is a genre, a greater envelope, that you put things in called thriller books, and a lot of those are sort of, like spy thrillers or mystery thrillers or things like that, people eat up. That's like your airport, bookstore grab. Like, I'm going to read this thriller, and then you're out of it, right? Like you're put in this environment that you would never normally be in. It's action packed or it's psychologically, thrilling or whatever, and just transport you. So, but I definitely see it as a component of other books as well. For example, there are parts of the books I've already got published that are thrilling, that bits of them are definitely thrillers. That's when I start ratcheting up toward the end of the book. I tend to do that with all of my books to the point that you're like, oh my God, so I love pushing people suddenly, like you're going along, you're walking along, and then suddenly a force is pushing you towards the edge of a cliff, and that's how I like to write my final chapters. So, because then you can't put it down, right? You go like, oh my God, what's going to happen? So I love reading that and seeing that, as a show or a movie. And so that's what I want to write. But definitely you can do both. It's either a genre or part of a novel. And as I mentioned, Doomflower, the campy horror novel, it's slowly building towards something nasty. And the last few chapters of that are very thrilling, stressful, very stressful. Like some of the people who have read it said they were really stressed out by that one, that they, on multiple levels, because that one has multiple threats of both human and non-human, and so take your pick which one's worse.
And that's something really magical, isn't it, about reading those kind of books, that you're doing something incredibly sedentary. You're sitting there having a cup of tea, reading a book, or lying in bed reading a book, and yet your heart is absolutely racing. You're sweating. You're having palpitations. That's magic. That's
that's what I'm hoping that people get out of both of those books. And without a comma, it's a little, well, they're both kind of mainstream in different ways, but there's speculative elements to both. And I wanted to do Out of Comma too, because I wanted to start writing more thrillers because I love them. It's one of my favorite types of books or elements in a book. And so this is kind of my foray into both horror and thriller, because it's both, and there is some sci-fi. So, I keep thinking that I will be writing more thrillers, like obviously I'm entering sort of fantasy, high fantasy and other things with some new books that got announced, and more horror. But, I definitely think, thriller is definitely appealing to me. And it's also got a large appeal from readers, and so I think that you can maybe bring more readers into your work if you kind of tick off that box. That's what I'm hoping.
We've got a question in the comments. Auntie Lise, this is more for you. 101 Colonel says, will there ever be a Rookery thriller?
I mean, let us get our first role-playing book out first, right? one thing at a time.
Yeah, but it's an interesting question
Yeah.
in terms of
And-
role playing adventures and how
Right.
they can share a lot of the features of a thriller.
Particularly
Absolutely.
that structure that you were talking about of somebody's ordinary life and then like falling or being pulled into something wider, like that is textbook adventure campaign, right? You think about the enemy within, for instance, for Warhammer that we were playing through just now, like that's exactly what happens. Your group are just traveling for their own reason and they encounter a dead body. I won't say what's significant about the dead body, but they encounter a significant dead body, and that's the first step into something that ends up shaking up the entire empire.
Yeah.
So
And last night, so we were on a Friday night, we myself, 3 of the Rooks, Andy Lee, Andy Law, and some other cast members, live stream the enemy within campaign on our Lawhammer channel. And last night we were playing Dark Deeds, so do go and check that out when it's up on Monday. But last night I felt that at the end I really didn't want to stop. It was quite a moment. It wasn't a cliffhanger per se, as Andy Law sometimes does to us, but it certainly was like I need to know what's happening next. Like I cannot wait.
Right.
And we're gonna have to wait for like 3 weeks because of people going on holiday.
Yeah, it was like the end of a volume. If it was like the end of volume 1 and volume 2 is about to happen, people would step through a door, and then and you're right, Lindsay. It is torture that it's going to be that many weeks.
It's so torturous. Just more than usual on that one. So. Master of Sock Puppets asked, you write across a range of different genres. Have you learned anything from writing a thriller that will change how you write in other genres?
Well, given the fact that I was already writing things that got thrilling, I don't think that particular aspect will change because I was already doing it. And so I'll just keep at it. But in terms of making it more real world, not set on a space station or on a floating asteroid castle, for example, or anything like that. Having it be more real world, I think can sometimes make these stories more powerful because, for one thing, I can draw more upon my own personal life experience and settings that I have actually been in. And then you can make those feel more real. So that is part of what I will take out of this experience and apply to other books. And in fact, one that was just announced yesterday, Godfestation, is a novella, a weird Appalachian horror novella. And it is set in my hometown and in Western North Carolina. This was written before Helene happened. So I was like, well, that was just incredibly prescient and unsettling. But, we're dealing with my own personal grief through another character. So I like using that real world situation and the real aspects of grief. Grief seems to be a through line throughout a lot of my works. It is, I've lost now both of my parents. I've lost several friends since 2020. I've moved across the country and back multiple times, and then everything that's happened in the world, so I think applying those things to thrillers is like when you are grieving, you are in a vulnerable state. And that creates an uncertainty as a character in these thrillers. You could be reacting or acting differently than you normally would to things. You would be ignoring some things, and you would also be more heightened in your awareness of other things. So those are things that I'm definitely going to take forward. Start drawing more on my life experience. I've had a very interesting life, worked on a lot of interesting jobs, known a lot of really fascinating people, and been in different places in the world. So those are things I'm taking forward.
And I think as well, like there are some readers, like it's obviously something in my other life as a teacher, like I'm constantly trying to get kids to read. And one of the tricky things is when you get kids who've reached that age where they used to read and they've kind of stopped, and trying to kind of engage them with reading and make recommendations. And the secret, and I'm not going to claim that this is a silver bullet and it works every time, but the secret very much is trying to find out what it is that they do and don't like. I know that seems obvious, but as people who love books, our first instinct is just to recommend the books we love. But there are some people who just won't. And like I love science fiction, so I'll happily watch something that's set in a spaceship or a castle asteroid, right? But there are some readers who just won't. They just won't get on board with something if it's not immediately relatable. So, and of course, what you can do with a near future thriller like that is you can hook them with the normal and
Exactly.
then gradually introduce the paranormal.
Right.
So.
And that's what I did with Doomflower too. It's very near future. There is some tech that you definitely will have in a few more years, that is introduced in both of these books. But they're not so crystallized that, it would be dated, these are things that are just going to be part of our lives. Right. So, I definitely think that, I'm writing something now. I sent out a pitch for something middle grade, and the extraordinary I've put on one side, but the relatability is front and center, and how these kids are reacting with their current, with their phones and with their, their backpacks and different things like this. And just making it real world draws you in no matter where you're at, because I think that that's part of the attraction, I think, to thrillers, right? Is that many of them are real world, and that it's just, if your life had been a little different, maybe you'd be in that exact situation, or, whatever, or maybe someone, was, in MI6 or something. I don't know. But, just saying, those kinds of things are really fun to kind of peel back layers on. And also it's an opportunity to introduce some other things that these mainstream thriller readers may never come across, like stuff about ecology, stuff about future tech, stuff about, species interactions, and about, astronomy and things like that. You could slip in the back door, be a little sneaky, with these things that we have some knowledge as writers and researchers about, that we kind of are introducing. I did that also in Doomflower. There's some ecology lessons embedded into both. In fact, there actually is a lesson in Doomflower, as part of one of the chapters there. So that's another fun bit of it for me. And then, so as you're reading, you're learning something,
I've been watching The Diplomat, and I think the new season's about to come out. The last season ended. I don't know if either of you have been watching it, but it's about, unsurprisingly, a diplomat. It's about the American ambassador in London.
Yeah.
And it struck me like that. It struck me because when I was leaving uni, my mum and dad were both in the Navy, and my mum was really keen for me to get a civil service job, but specifically, for some reason, the Foreign Service. So to become a diplomat, which I would have loved, I think, in hindsight. And so watching that show, I've really felt like how unusual a job being an ambassador is, and how that could have been a life that I could have had in another world. I could have had that life, and how quite peculiar it is, because once you become an ambassador, you get a house and you get servants. It's like becoming aristocracy from the olden days. It's a really peculiar life that you lead. And then you overlay in The Diplomat all of the, obviously, because it's not just about the day-to-day life of an American ambassador. They've got to ratchet up the tension, and there's an attack. The first season opens with an attack on an American warship in the Gulf, and I was really struck by it. Part of me is watching it because I'm like, oh, I wonder what that life would have been like. I wonder where I would have been posted, and what languages would I have learned, and would I have become an expert in something that I'm not an expert in? So yeah, it really resonated with me.
It's like an alternate universe and that's another reason I'm writing these kinds of books, is because I had the same situation of, it was recommended to me by somebody a long time ago that I should go into the NSA. And I had actually considered joining FBI, but I was looking into NSA. I didn't do it. And I sometimes wonder, well, shit, should I? Maybe, because I had this science degree. I kind of was very open to learning a lot of new things, and intelligence work would have been interesting. And but then again, ambassadorial work is quite fascinating. And by the way, The Diplomat is one of my favorite shows. So don't spoil season 2 for me, because I'm still watching it.
I haven't even started it yet, because I had a few things to catch up on, but I was so excited. Because Andy Law, my husband, had watched The Diplomat, and he watches a lot of things and then recommends them to me. And he said to me today, the biggest struggle is getting me to actually watch them, because as soon as he tells me to do something, I just have this perverse urge not to do it. It had taken me ages to watch The Diplomat. And of course, like all his recommendations, another one he recently made to me was The Orville, and I'm binge watching that just now. I'm totally loving it. But The Diplomat, it was amazing.
It is. And then Slow Horses has been one of my favorite things.
Well, okay, so I might need to watch that. He has
Oh
recommended that to me, and I have yet to take him up on that.
Oh my God. You've got to watch Slow Horses. I'm telling you,
Yeah,
like life-changing.
good.
Holy
good.
crap.
I've only got one bad thing to say about Slow Horses, and that is particularly the first couple of seasons, they're too close to the books. In that I watched the first season, I then read all of the books, and then I watched the second season, and I'm like, oh, I know exactly what's going to happen. Things have diverged a bit now, now that it's gone on, but it's incredible.
That's an interesting feature. Like, if any of my work is adapted, I will have discussions about that kind of thing and what can diverge and what cannot, which would be a good problem to have, honestly. Anybody in Hollywood is listening. So, good stuff.
Maybe, Lindsay, what we need is a system. Do you remember we had a system where like you couldn't get your daughters to read books, so you got me to recommend books instead, because they would listen to me but they wouldn't listen to you. Like, maybe Andy needs to work out who you maybe
No, I don't listen to anyone. He's the one I listen to the most. So like no one else either. But
just contrarian.
Now you've said about I'm just contrarian. Now you've said about Slow Horses. Now other people.
Now you're never going to watch it.
No, I definitely will. Now other people have chipped in. My mind's just contrary.
Slow Horses is only six episodes a season as well, so it's actually very quick to get through.
It's quick.
Yeah. 101 Colonel says the biggest thriller for kids have the mobile phones cut out and they have to fix it. And for
that
me,
is a plot point, So, but that actually did happen with Helene. That people didn't have service and they didn't know how bad they had it because they couldn't see how bad everybody else had it. And then when you start seeing the TikToks come out of how awful, like some of them reacting in real time as they get service on their phone, they're going, oh my God, so it was kind of traumatizing for a lot of these kids to not have service, because they don't know a time when there weren't mobile phones. And we do, right? Like, so
I have a friend. She's from California originally, from the Bay Area, and her kids were like one was 2 years older and one was almost the same age as my eldest. So she gave me a lot of stuff. She was very kind when Josie was born, and we didn't have much money and we were really struggling. And she gave me like a whole, I don't know what you'd call it, like a layette where it had like all these blankets and baby stuff. But she used to talk about how they had a family ritual, like, so because before mobile phones, what would you do if you couldn't find each other in a town? And their particular family thing was, because their dad always ended up at a donut shop, that they would always end up at a specific donut shop. And if it was America, like, it would be a specific brand of donut shop. I don't know which one. I didn't.
Either Krispy Kreme or Dunkin', probably.
Yeah, I don't think it was Dunkin' Donuts. I think I would have remembered that. I think it was probably Krispy Kreme. And because this was early 2000s, we didn't really, Dunkin' Donuts had arrived here, but Krispy Kreme hadn't. So it didn't. I feel like it might have been a person's name as well. And it had like a particular,
another one,
like a clown or something. Anyway, so she
Randy's,
said that.
In LA, Randy's. Yeah, there's a lot.
It might have been Randy's. Anyway.
No choice. You were spoiled for choice with donuts. We can say that about America for sure.
Whereas, and it was challenging when they were in Europe, because if they were in a particular, like, there might not be a donut shop. So what did they do?
Right.
But I remember talking about that and thinking, oh, we don't really have that as a family, presumably. I don't know why, but they needed it. And these days, like, you wouldn't have that. Like, if your mobile phone died and you were in a different, like, where would you go to?
Yeah, it's good to have a plan.
Yeah. Yeah, the donut shop plan. 101 Colonel has said ambassador to the Appalachians, and that we were talking about spookiness and environment, and I just wondered if you, because it's Halloween week, have you got any traditions from your childhood? Is there any specific way you celebrated Halloween or not, and where you came from?
It's interesting because when I was a kid, when I was very young, we moved from the city, which is barely a city, out to the country. My parents were building a house that would house two of my grandparents. Sadly, one of them passed away while it was being built, and the other one became really ill and couldn't move in. So we had this big empty house. In fact, my parents were then broke and they couldn't finish the upstairs. So we lived in the basement and there were skeleton walls upstairs for 7 years.
Oh my
God. We had brick around all of it. So from the outside, you would never know. But they couldn't afford to finish the upstairs for 7 freaking years. I mean, for a while, we didn't even have doors like on our rooms. We had concrete floor and no doors. We used like big things of styrofoam to move. And it was a really bizarre childhood for me to have. Whereas my siblings, who are much older than me and had basically empty nested at the time, had kind of normal suburban upbringing. And I had this bizarre, huge, half empty house that sometimes bats would get in upstairs and fly. Oh my God. And so like, you know, for Halloween, like one year, it was also kind of was off like a country road next to a railroad track, which I went on all the time and had many adventures, which I shouldn't have done, but I did, off and alone. Anyway, so it's right there next to the train track, which has got its own spooky stuff going on. It's off on this curve, and then it's away from like literally everybody I know at school. Like they're over in this sort of suburban neighborhood and all trick-or-treating together, and I'm out here and like we literally have woods in the front of the house. It looks like a haunted house, right? Itself. So I always kind of bummed out because I would always go all out. We'd be like, we got to get the candy. I got to dress up. We got to do this. And we'd have all the candy. Nobody'd ever come to our door because how would they get there? There's no sidewalk. It's a dark country road. So but you know, it was kind of like a delusion on my part that I could make this happen. But then I occasionally would go over to my friends. I'd be driven over and dropped off, and we would do the trick-or-treating over there. And that was a whole new world for me. I was like, oh my God, it's like in the movies, you know, sad. But so then one year I had a Halloween party. I think I was like 8, and it was upstairs before the upstairs was finished. So it was like these sort of breezy, dark tarp over the skeleton walls of like the beams fluttering.
That's so cool.
The ambiance was chef's kiss. The kids were kind of mildly spooked, and understandably. And, you know, part of me was like, yeah, I feel kind of weird about this, but at the same time, this is the perfect scary environment. So we had this Halloween party, and there was even a big tub bobbing for apples. And my brother, one of my older brothers was in town. And that rapscallion, he's like, we all start kind of dancing around, and he's like dancing me closer and closer. He's like 11 years older than me. So he was, you know, a young man. Dancing me closer and closer to that tub, closer, closer. And I hit it and I fall into the tub, butt first. So yeah, that was an experience for Halloween. Of course, he just died, like absolutely died.
I think it's interesting that we call it like duking for apples as well as like bobbing for apples.
Yeah.
And I was
ducking your head down and get the apple out.
Yeah, cool. Like getting a duke, and sometimes people would do it with flour on their faces, but I think that was like a modern like
when you're making an apple crisp here, you know.
No, like not with water. So
okay.
Because this would be like guides or brownies, because it was perceived to be like too dangerous to do it with water. So they would hide sweets in flour. Anyway, but I was reading
that's a clear indicator of the fact that I'm a few years older than you, Lindsay, because we definitely were doing water when I was in Cubs and Scouts.
We did do water as well, but I had forgotten, and I read it yesterday, I had forgotten that bobbing for apples comes from an older tradition where you would bob for apples to see who would be the first to be married on Halloween. So that's why you did it. But also, and then all of these games that I had read in some book came back to me that are all on the same theme. So like you peel an apple and you throw the peel over your shoulder only on Halloween. And it's supposedly like it'll go in the letter of the person you'll be married to, or you take the apple seeds and you put them on your face while saying boys' names. And when they fall off, like the one that falls off is the one you'll get married to. And I had forgotten about all of these, but that's where a lot of and it got me thinking. So you call it trick-or-treating, but we call it guising, where you go around houses, you dress up, but you sing or you say a poem and you get kind of rewarded for your
heroine, except
yeah. But I wondered if all of the apple ones are to do with getting married. Does it come from the idea of like getting dressed up in your best clothes and going and presenting yourself round houses to find a suitor? So that was what a terrifying idea.
Yeah. But, you know, like I loved trick-or-treating and I really felt like when I was getting older, you know, and I was able to go over to those neighborhoods alone with my friends, that's when it became super, super duper fun. And like, even at like, I think up to age 15, we basically were pushing the envelope of the age limit, because I kind of feel like a lot of us, okay, let me preface this by saying this is the 1980s. Satanic panic was a thing. And I was in East Tennessee, and it was hyper religious and things got weird. So there was some of that attitude. A lot of us didn't go through with it. But there was a little bit in which, it was kind of frowned upon, or people were convinced that there were people under that railroad bridge next to my house that were devil worshippers.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not even kidding. Like, people really believed this stuff. And then, of course, you had like the whole thing of like, you might get a razor blade in your Snickers bar or whatever, which never happened. So there's a lot of memes about that now, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like every year they come around and I'm like, is that a thing people worry about? Is that... Yeah.
So, but as I got older, it was more fun in a different way. And I started to really appreciate costuming and things like that. And then I had an epic party at the end of the 1980s, close to Halloween, that was like a total movie party. I mean, it was legit like a movie. That was crazy. And I lean into that a little bit in Doomflower. I refer to that party through a different lens. So, then you start entering this adulthood and whatever, but now I'm a parent. And so like when my kids were very tiny and then we start dressing them up all cute, and go around trick-or-treating, that was just an entirely new joy. And then we was finally in cities that had really great trick-or-treat neighborhoods and people would go all out. California goes all the way out for Halloween, decorations everywhere, kind of special effects too, which is appropriate being in LA. And it's a delight here. And a lot of times the adults will have stuff for the other adults and be like, come over to the table, I'll give you a beer or some wine or whatever, So it's really, really fun. Those are some of our Halloween traditions. Like, we always decorate and, we go trick-or-treating and we put a bowl of candy out if we're not home, or if we are, that we'll hand it out, those kinds of things. So it's just
very similar. It's very similar here, except with that one difference that you're supposed to tell a joke or sing a song before you get your treat.
Yeah, you just say trick or treat.
Yeah.
And then
I always feel because when my girls were younger, and literally just till a couple of years ago, so they were the same. They were doing it when they were 15 or 16, because there are whole neighborhoods here where there are really like good reputation for guising streets, where that like almost all the houses will have pumpkins out and they'll have their lights on, and you'll get something from them. But yeah, it was really fun, because I used to do it when I was a teenager as well, around about that same age, about 15. I was old enough that my mum and dad let me go out on a Friday night by myself, so then we could go like guising again, which we had sort of, because I lived in the country, there was nowhere to go where I was.
So, I had experience that too. Yeah. I just think it's such a fun tradition,
Yeah, it really is. So, oh, you were just talking about movies. We've talked a couple of times about movies. So Lazy Cat has asked, what is your favorite thriller movie?
Oh my God, that's a hard one, because I love so many, as well as shows. Gosh, I love so many thriller movies, and I love the whole gamut of them, and I do think of The Thing as both a thriller and a horror, because, there is some bleed through, right? I like that was a real world situation that became something else. And that I like people being suspicious of each other and not really knowing, anything like that is kind of my jam. I love spy movies, spy thrillers. Of course, I'm sitting here. We've already talked about The Diplomat, which to me is thrilling on a different level, as well as Slow Horses. What are some other, I love action thrillers, just, of course, I'm drawing a big blank here, being asked my favorite.
I think like for me, I'll help you out. For me, the first 3 Jason Bourne movies, like not the spin-off or the random extra one that didn't need, but the first 3 work so well together, because they work individually, but as a trilogy, they're perfectly bookended, and they should have just stopped. But but again, that's like that example of someone who wakes up obviously not knowing anything, but again has no idea what he's falling into, and that formula you said about falling into a wider world, a wider conspiracy, just keeps going. So
I thought that the film based on the John le Carré novel with Gary Oldman in it and Mark Strong and sorry,
Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy.
Yeah, I thought that was excellent. Like,
really great.
Really, really great. And then I read, as a result of that, The Spy That Came In From the Cold, which is an excellent book.
Yep.
Because I'm not really like a thriller person. I've never really read books that are thrillers, and it wasn't my main genre of film that I would watch, so I came to it quite late. And so those like sort of more real life ones, like The Diplomat, and I feel like Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, and they're quite real. Like you can imagine it doesn't stretch the bounds of your, like a lot of the action thrillers, you're just like, it's a bit ridiculous. Yeah. And you have to, I kind of treat them as like fantasy action thrillers. They're kind of like wish fulfillment.
Yeah, well, that's for sure what they are. That's exactly what they are. Yeah. You know, but I also really like really disturbing stuff, like occasionally, you know, like, and Get Out was freaking terrifying. You know, Split was really good, I thought. I'm trying to think of some others that I really, you know, okay. Well, I'll just tell you, like Dead Calm is one of my all-time favorites.
Oh,
what I really like about that one is very close quarters, which again is something else that hasn't come with The Thing. So there's a little bit of that aspect of Dead Calm with Atacama, you know, of like being stuck with somebody who isn't who they present as. Those are terrifying situations, you know. So that's one of my favorites is Dead Calm for sure.
I'm trying to think of Dead Calm. Is it got one of?
It's got Nicole Kidman.
Nicole Kidman, yeah.
Yeah. And so they're out on the boat, you know. So yeah. I really love stuff like, I have to say, things like Knives Out with mysteries involved, because the mystery thriller thing, I love that combination a lot. I love that. So those are some of my favorites. I have a lot.
Yeah, I was thinking when you were talking about Atacama.
Ario's great.
Yeah. Yeah, when you were talking about Atacama, I was thinking that with a different twist, a less science fiction twist and more of a horror twist, it's quite a Cthulhu-esque like location and stories. I quite like the horror thriller of the Cthulhu mythos. Can be quite compelling.
Yeah, that's something that I dug into for the upcoming fantasy books, is because there's cosmic horror in those. That is the main threat in that fantasy universe, is a cosmic horror invasion. And so they don't have any way of stopping this thing, these things from happening, except to try to find these mythical 7 dragons, if they even existed. So, you know, I love cosmic horror stories. I've written several short stories with that sort of aspect in it. One of them, The Glove and the Black Lantern, is also in the Shadow Galaxy. There is a shared villain that I have through a lot of my short stories that will become apparent in other books I write down the line. Somebody who is a cosmic threat, you know. So
the Shadow Galaxy. The Shadow Galaxy is the kind of anthology that when I was reading it, it took me back to my childhood. So I spent a lot of time reading as a child due to the no television. Like, I could empathize with you having like a weird house, because it was very weird not to have a television. And we lived in this like old cottage in the country. And I don't know about you, but like when you're a certain age, the most important thing is to be normal, like not to stand out, not to have people. Yeah, I was weird. My dad had like an orange Chevette, a car, but like he'd crashed it. And so one bit of it was like redone black, like the wing. And that was like the most embarrassing thing that could ever have happened to me.
I can't even.
Yeah, until he got a yellow canoe. So then he would like come to school and pick me up in this orange car with one black bit and a yellow canoe on his roof. And it was just like the worst. And so layered on top of that, the idea that I would then have to take these friends to a house and explain why there was no television. And again, being weird was not good, but being poor was like just
poor and weird sucked.
Poor and weird, just so bad. So yeah. and the Shadow Galaxy kind of like took me back to that childhood where I read a lot of books and we lived in the country, no street lights, no pavement. Yeah. And when you read a book like that, and when I read some of the stories in the Shadow Galaxy, I really did feel that feeling of like shut the curtains and like pull my duvet up to my neck so the vampires can't get me.
Well, and then some of the locations where some of the horror stories in that are real in my hometown. So the tunnel at the end, that's a real freaking urban legend there. In fact, I took Gareth to that tunnel. So there's a tunnel in East Tennessee where if you go in at night and you cut off your engines, you're supposed to hear a scream from some woman that was murdered a long time ago. So we went, and I'm like, God, I'm really glad we're here during the day, because inside the tunnel, it's already dark. There's actually a stream running through the tunnel. So you actually have to drive through the stream in the tunnel. That was one of the big things. Like, we had several things like that in East Tennessee, which were really disturbing. And I went to a lot of abandoned structures, an entire abandoned like ghost towns. really dangerous, into caves. I actually went to a lot of caves, true caves. And so I saw a lot of creepy stuff, but honestly, always it was the people that, you know, I kind of came across like peripherally or stories about them. And also like my, one of my grandfathers was a coal miner. So I'm a coal miner's granddaughter, up in Southwest Virginia. And he had stories too from up there, which up in the holler where things are very isolated and a lot can happen. And also he's going down in the mines. So, you know, I have all of this sort of rich family history. You know, my dad lived in the country and had a lot of stories. We had one of our ancestors was murdered, you know, and then on my mom's side of the family, like there was an entire like moonshining run operation with some of my ancestors that if you went up in there in the holler, they would mow you down with a Tommy gun, you know, like crazy stuff.
Wow.
Crazy. Yeah. So like I'm steeped in all of this sort of urban and country legend stuff growing up, and it's starting to come out, right? It's coming out in stories. And then a lot of it was like the stuff that kept me being like, ooh, I don't want anything to do with that. Now I'm writing about kind of as a coping mechanism, almost to kind of like, you know, sweat it out, you know, like I got to get those old things out.
I feel like for young people today, there's less, it feels like there's less that's contained in their sense of place, and there's more that they get because of their phones, because of the internet. So I don't know if your children were the right age in 2016 when there was the 2016 clown panic.
I remember that. That was amazing.
Yeah, you remember it. It was amazing, right?
I kind of loved it.
Yeah, but it ripped through the world like wildfire, like so quickly. It was the kind of thing that in the past would have been connected with the place you lived, and it would have been like, this old guy who's really weird is actually a clown in disguise who comes out at night and kills people, except it was just everywhere.
Yeah. And so like some of that was going on too, right? We had some really creepy people. And like when I lived next to the train track, and I said that sometimes I would go down it alone, which no young kid should ever do.
Never.
And I would sometimes go down alone. My parents didn't know where I was. Why? Because I didn't have a cell phone. So I'd be gone like all day doing all kinds of crazy stuff. They didn't know where I was. As long as I came back by supper, you know, or before nightfall. Okay. So I took advantage of that, and I went really far away on my bike quite often. But sometimes I'd also walk away down the train tracks, and sometimes I would see actual train hobos, and they would dart off into the woods, and I'd be like, I think it's time I turn around and go home now.
Yeah.
You know? So crazy. You know, we saw a lot of things, and I heard a lot of those stories, and I've experienced a lot of really weird stuff up in the mountains, really creepy stuff. So it's just, that's all kind of informing everything, but also, you know, working in science and kind of seeing the dynamics in there that like working in research is at times really rewarding and other times really demoralizing, because you're hoping that you're doing something good for the world, but not that many people are understanding or respecting it, you know. And then if you're not a PhD, you're not treated the same, you know, and I wasn't. So that was that's coming out in Atacama as well, for sure.
It's interesting you mentioned about being a PhD, because I work in banking in the week, and I'm starting to see that more in the field that I'm in banking, and like analytics and data, behavioral science. Almost everyone has a PhD now. And when I joined the bank in the early 2000s after I graduated, it would have been unheard of. Like there might have been one person who was a PhD, and it would be really weird. It would be completely unconnected to their banking job, and it would just be random. And now so many, and it's really interesting to see like the inflation of expectation in terms of education in that industry.
Right. Yeah. So it became obvious to me a little too late that I needed an advanced degree in science to be able to make decent money, because I was making terrible money in research. And so I pivoted from bench science stuff to clinical research. And I did a lot better in that, you know, and worked on clinical studies and stuff like that for a while. But still, I knew I was kind of capped, that I could only go so far. And I did make an attempt to get a master's degree in epidemiology, which is why I ended up in Southern California, because I was accepted for a program there. I started going, but my younger child was too young to handle, you know, the separation in the daycare, and I decided to withdraw. If I had stuck with it, 2020 would have been very interesting indeed for me.
Wow. Yeah.
So it all kind of worked out, because like after, like I had started working as a science writer so I could stay home with my kids in the early 2000s. And that expanded, you know, a bit. And then I finally decided to start getting my fiction out in the world, which I'd been writing for decades. So it just kind of all came together at the right time when my kids were young, that do the science writing and try to get my fiction out in the world. But, you know, I decided then that it was probably going to be too late to go back and get a master's. If I went back now, which I could, but at this point I'm like, I don't think it's worth it for me. You know, like I'm 50, you know, I need to be thinking a little bit differently about things going forward. I need to make sure my kids are the ones getting their degrees and getting out in the world. And like, so my hope is that something will come of my writing and my art, at least to make it sustainable at some point, you know. And I do realize I still need the science writing gig during the day, and I still need more gig income. So I'm kind of duct taping together all these things. You know, writing is not a way to make a living, you know, it just isn't. Like you hear the stories about big 7-figure book deals because they are rare.
Yeah.
So I have not got one.
So we've got about 3 minutes left. So I'll just there's a couple of questions left that John had pre-submitted. So we'll jump into those before we wrap up. So John has asked, how important is it to balance suspense and frustration in a good thriller? And he had a follow-up, but I didn't have space, so I put it here. And how important is it to feed suspense secondhand to the reader through the characters rather than just hiding information from the reader?
I mean, I feel like you need to know as a reader that something's going on, that you can't have this deus ex machina situation, that there need to be hints that something isn't right. I think it's a cheat otherwise. I hate that kind of stuff. One of my favorite books that I'm not going to name has the ultimate Godsmack at the end. And I'm like, you know, this was really a thriller and quite scary and really pretty awesome up to that point. And now I feel like you've basically taken the agency away from the entire rest of the book. But then again, like there also need to be hints dropped of a possible solution. You know, that kind of, I kind of love that. And that's kind of where mysteries come in, right? Where there are clues. You can find clues. I love the balance of suspense and frustration, because that agitation that you're feeling is coming hopefully through the main character or through a situation that they're in. And you're just like, what is going on? Why is this? What, you know, and that's relatable because life is like that, right? Life is full of frustrations, and writing something, you know, pretty real world or completely otherworldly. Like if you're not relating to the characters, what's the point? So I feel like that's really important. Doing the suspense, like doling it out, like sometimes a slow burn is nice. And then a massive destabilization, or it can be full octane the whole way, depending on the style of thriller. Like, you know, when you're doing like Jason Bourne kind of stuff, like that's high octane stuff. You know, let's go. But like a more psychological thriller or a more intimate thriller, slowly building, slowly creating a destabilization, and doling out slowly some hints of what's going on. I think that's the sweet spot there. Hopefully I have threaded that needle with Atacama.
Well, I love Atacama already, so yeah. I think you have.
Yeah, and the point you made about the protagonist, like perhaps going through grief or something, that means that they don't pick up on things or pick up on different things, I think is a key to that, because
they're a bit of an unreliable narrator. Yeah, a little bit. Yeah. Like you're showing things as they're happening, but you're also projecting, or at least I am in this with Fiona, the main character, that she's not okay. She's super not okay. She's got a lot of unresolved grief from death and from relationships. She also has unrequited feelings to deal with. She has the insecurity about her job. She's worried she's going to get fired. She's now worried she's going to get killed. You know, so like it's a lot. She's going through a lot. She is imperfect, but she is very real, very human. You know, and you know you want her to make it. You know.
And thank you, Jendia. And that brings us to the end of our hour. So can you just remind us again, when's the release date and where can people get the book from?
Atacama is up for pre-order now. You can get it from most of the major online booksellers. It is currently pre-order for hardcover. There will be a paperback pre-order later, as well as ebook. A lot of the ebook ones like Kobo, it's up. Apple, it's up. It's not on Amazon Kindle yet for pre-order. I don't know why. So all of those will roll out. It comes out May 13th, 2025 from Slay House Publishing. And, but yeah, it's on bookshop.org for the US. I don't know why it's not listing for the UK yet, but it's definitely already on Amazon pre-order, and it'll get there. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. Thanks, as always, to my co-host, Andy Leask. Thank you to you, Jendia, for sharing your Saturday evening/afternoon with us. And thank you to our patrons who help us make these Inside the Rookery streams ad-free. And until the next time, all that remains for me to say is go and pre-order Jendia's book, and goodbye. Caw-caw, caw-caw, caw-caw. See you soon.
Bye.